Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Thursday, March the 30th. The end of the month already. 2023. We're continuing to look at the gospel reading from this past Sunday, the story of the sheep and the goats, sometimes called the Great Judgment, the Last Judgment. There's that element of judging, but who does the judging is always the question. The judging is always up to God, of course, but we sometimes can get judgmental, and I talked a little bit about that in my sermon. I came across a great piece that in preparing for the sermon that didn't find its way into the sermon, but a pastor by the name of Andy Stanley. He serves a really large congregation in the Atlanta, Georgia suburbs. His father, Charles Stanley, only recently retired, but he was for many years the senior pastor at I think it was First Baptist in Atlanta, In Touch Ministries. He's on TV, I think still to this day. But his son, Andy Stanley, once wrote a piece called The Secret Beliefs of Judgmental Christians, and I'd like to share it with you this morning. He writes, "I would have made a good Pharisee. I was a good rule keeper. I was a good boy, a good teenager, a good college student. Not only was I was good at being good. And when you're good at being good, you get good at judging all the not-so-good people. And as you may have noticed, judgmental people come across as dismissive and angry. Having spent too many years in that camp, I can tell you why, but this needs to stay in the room. Judgmental people are secretly jealous. It's such a well-kept secret, they don't even know. Jealousy, he says, always manifests itself as disdain and anger. It's next to impossible to see jealousy in the mirror. Christians aren't supposed to be jealous or angry, so Christians are better than average cover-up artists. We sanitize and sanctify our jealousy-fueled anger by adding an adjective to it, righteous. We have righteous anger. The self-righteous justify their anger by claiming to serve as a reflection of God's attitude towards sin. After all, God hates sin. In fact, he got so angry with sinners that in the Old Testament, he got so angry he drowned them all. Under the old covenant arrangements with Israel, he got so mad he allowed his own temple to be torn down and then put everybody in timeout. Read the prophets, God's spokesmen. They were angry as Sheol. So righteous anger is a thing as long as we hover over the Old Testament anyway. And here's something else we need to keep between us. Judgmental Christians are glad there's a hell. They can't wait for Jesus to divide the sheep from the goats. They want sinners to get what they deserve so they can finally get what they deserve. Except they don't use the word deserve because the proper thing to say is we all deserve hell. But I'm not convinced people who say that actually believe that. Judgmental Christians use the term reward, meaning that in the end the faithful are rewarded for their faithfulness. But if you would have asked me what faithfulness looked like when I was in my Pharisee season, I would have said that faithfulness meant not sinning. I grew up convinced that professional sin avoiders like me would one day be rewarded for avoiding sin. I never gave much thought to the one another's scattered throughout the New Testament. It never crossed my mind that bearing someone's burden was grounds for a reward. Galatians 6 verses 1 through 2. But I was so aware of the moral and ethical purity passages along with Jesus' parables concerning wealth, and so I was generous in order to be rewarded later. I remained morally pure so that I would have a better marriage later. I was honest so as not to get on God's bad side. It was all about me, thus the self in self-righteous. If you had confronted me about my intolerance, I would have defended my indignation by extolling Christian values and virtues. I would have reminded you of how much God hates sin, especially pride. If you'd asked me if I was jealous, I would have looked at you like you were crazy. But I was. I resented the freedom of my non-Christian friends and acquaintances. I envied their carefree pursuit of pleasure. I resented them because I wanted to do what they were doing, and my Christianity prohibited me from doing so. So I judged them. I secretly looked forward to the day that they would reap what they were sowing while wishing that I could sow right along with them. A good counselor will tell you that when your emotional reaction to an event doesn't line up with the reality of the event, you have work to do. I had work to do. He says the proper New Covenant response to sin is not jealousy, it's not anger, it's not even righteous anger. The proper response to sin is a broken heart. From God's vantage point, sinners are like lost things. If your phone is lost, you don't get angry at your phone. If you do, you have work to do. We don't get angry with things we lose. We get busy looking for them. If sin makes you mad but doesn't break your heart, you guessed it, you have work to do. Judgmental people secretly revel in the calamity sin creates in the lives of sinners. It vindicates them. It makes their sacrifice, obedience, and faithfulness worth it. If Jesus' parable of the prodigal son were an actual event, I can't help but think that the older, firstborn brother would have been thrilled at the cause and effect suffering of his irresponsible sibling. The younger brother's failure left the older brother looking better and more responsible than ever. But Jesus doesn't give the older brother a shout out. The older brother's response reflected in the perspective of the Pharisees and religious leaders in Jesus' audience. Jesus could not have been clearer. New covenant folks don't get angry at lost things. They go looking for them. Again, this was excerpted from a book entitled Irresistible by Andy Stanley. Food for thought for all of us, dare I say most of us, who find ourselves, at least occasionally, being just a tad bit judgmental. Well, I'll leave you on that thought, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this passage tomorrow. Until then, take care. Bye.